she yells it, so then we know it's actually happening these days. Well, thanks for joining everyone in this conversation hosted with the Minneapolis Green Theater Alliance around sustainability and accountability. Because I think, I know it's something that I've been thinking a lot about in the pandemic, you know, a year and a half not doing theater, that as I come back to theater, what are the things I want to be conscious about doing differently? And starting the Minneapolis chapter of the Green Theater Alliance was one of those things I wanted to try and take on to see what we can get started with our industry. So I think let's go ahead and just maybe do like some brief introductions of who we are, maybe just a little bit about our background, and maybe what you're hoping to kind of get out of this conversation, or what you're interested in seeing out of the Minneapolis Green Theater Alliance in general.
I can start. Hi, everyone. My name's Jerry, he, him, and I have been out of the theater scene for much longer than the pandemic's been around, and just recently started getting back. When I was working in theater, it was primarily building sets, and the amount of stuff that I took to the dump every show was just unconscionable. So really excited that we're having more in-depth conversations about what we do to stay green. Do you want me to popcorn someone?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Lucas.
Hi. Sorry, I'm in my shop right now as we speak. I'm cartooning a drop. My name is Luke Granholm. I am the assistant professor of theater design at the University of Minnesota Morris. And I do a lot of green theater here, a fair amount. And I'm excited to be involved.
I can go next.
Popcorn Sarah Herman. Okay, there we
go. Well, you're in the space that I went to college in, so I'm very familiar. I am a set designer and scenic artist. I work at Theater La Te Da right now, and I work a lot with like educational theater too. And I'm just looking to see how GTA can help us all be more, or like share our resources with each other, and connect people with things that already exist, and things that are unwanted, that can be passed on to a new owner, basically. So
So I'm David Bovers, and I am crashing your party. I'm actually in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm the faculty technical director at Carnegie Mellon University. And I'm looking for ideas, because every how to green your theater suggestion seems to be don't throw anything away, build everything out of stock, and build less scenery. And none of those options are really acceptable to the people that are directing my shows or designing my shows. And so I'm looking for ideas.
Great, excellent. Did you just like find us through Facebook?
Yeah, I'm a victim of an algorithm, I think.
Wow, I'm just impressed by the algorithm right now. Who knew? Yeah, I think that, you know, Jerry, you mentioned this too, just the amount of stuff that we throw away, you know, I think really gets you thinking. And I think, David, you're right on that we're kind of in this like difficult spot at times, because we may have this kind of like desire to want to throw stuff away, but yet there is kind of this standard or expectation of a level of scenery that maybe can't be reused. So maybe that's kind of a place that we can start our conversation in some ways, is because I know, Luke, you're also in an academic institution too. So I don't know if there's some things that kind of immediately kind of come to your mind with what David has mentioned, but just kind of getting that initial conversation started, I think can be an interesting and difficult a point when you're trying to make greener choices. So maybe we can just kind of start there with our conversation, because I think that that ultimately rolls into how we keep other people accountable for these larger choices, as they all start with these conversations before we can implement them into a fully realized production.
Yeah, what comes to mind is a website. I'll put it in the chat. I don't remember the name of it at this moment, but it kind of clarifies which materials have the largest carbon footprint, and wood materials have the least carbon footprint out of like all the materials on that list. And especially like things like aluminum, new aluminum is probably the worst material you can work with in terms of carbon footprinting. So I'll put that in the chat. I'll look up for that right now and put that.
Oh, that's my wiener dog. Sorry, she's barking. So
What was the question again, Sadie? I'm sorry.
yeah, how do you go about just getting the conversation started, maybe with a production team, when you're starting to make greener choices?
Yeah, I can start. We kind of went double down into it. We decided to make it not only like an environmental choice, but also an aesthetic choice. So the directors were very much on board with it as well. However, you know, there is this idea David talked about managing expectations, and that's something that sometimes directors have a hard time understanding, like how physics works and how light works. But working on we don't do like fully reclaimed object shows every show, mostly because it's a lot of time on our end. But utilizing the community is a big part of it. So when we make a call out for like say items for productions, things like that, we always put out a call for like, does anyone have any weird collections they want to get rid of from like some relative that died? That's how I ended up with 40 bowling pins. It's kind of an effort that has to be done, at least from what we found. The easiest way is that everyone's involved all in, not just one person, because if it's just one person, not everyone, because you have to make certain accommodations when you do green theater, like, well, we can't do that because X, Y, and Z, and we want to try and do this, So there's this expectation that has to be accepted by everyone in the team, and that typically helps us a little bit. I'll stop talking, so I'm just spinning my wheels.
Yeah, I think that there's kind of like a spectrum to it as well, because I think that there's like everyone is on board, like everyone like agrees with like the green choices and it's part of the aesthetic, and that is like just complete the cultural thing that is understood amongst the production team. And then I think there's maybe designers and technical directors and maybe other staff members kind of taking the lead on making choices within like the realm of like, these are the choices we have control over, such as like, let's make sure we purchase RevFly, or, we're sourcing from responsible places. Sarah, I don't know if there's other, because I think you've spent a little bit more time with like products. RevFly just comes to mind since we got some of it yesterday in the van. If there's other like things that you can think of, there's the link that you just added, but if there's any other products.
Yeah, it depends on what you're trying to go for. Like my background is scenic painting, and I have to use a lot of textures. And I found that there's one particular elastomeric that is the best. It's called Jaxan, and it doesn't have any carcinogens in it, and it has like no toxicity. So you do have to like purchase it through the website, and it doesn't travel well in the wintertime. So you have to like plan ahead if you need it or not, because the stuff that you can get at Home Depot that's always on the shelf is full of carcinogens. So you just have to, it takes a little extra planning.
Sarah, I know that you just kind of inherently kind of approach your designs with kind of that kind of reclaimed approach. Is it ever like a conversation that you had with directors to like consciously make those choices, or are you just making those choices as a designer?
I'm just making those choices as a designer. I oftentimes don't bring in the like reuse aspect of it, because I think a lot of directors don't really care how something is made, as long as I'm within budget and the end product looks like they want it to, or like how I've sold it to them. So I oftentimes just do it on my own, I guess. I'm a designer maker, so I can skip on some of the conversation, and because I'm the person making everything too. So
because I know that I've got 2 productions that'll be getting started in the spring, and I like led the conversation. I think it's a little bit different when you're like the designer, maybe, because David, did I hear correctly that you're like more of a technical director kind of role? Because I think when you're the designer, I think you can kind of lead with some of those conversations and philosophies too. Because I've had 2 productions now where I said, I'm really trying to make green choices. I kind of made that kind of clear up front in the conversation. So it becomes like a talking point with directors up front before we even get much further into things. David, I'm kind of curious kind of to hear maybe a little bit more when you say you're looking for ideas or things like that. Is it in ways that maybe you can coach designers, or is it specifically like products that you're kind of interested in finding?
I think that I'm chasing a philosophy more than I am a material or an aesthetic, and also more trying to build awareness that green choices cost money or take time, and so that we have to be willing to see that the impact of that on the stage. A lot of the advice that we get, on reuse or reclaiming, that all comes out of a mindset where maybe you're not paying for labor by the hour. And if you have to pay people to take things apart or to build things in a way that they can be taken apart, then you're going to build less things. And I'm trying to figure out how to sell that to directors and designers, to say, well, I know you're used to this size of set, but we have to build a smaller set because some portion of our labor has to go to behaving ecologically responsibly in a way that we haven't done before. So there's that. And I mean, like, I'm always looking for materials, and like, I'd really like to know more about, the steel people say that steel is better because steel is recyclable, and the wood people say that wood is better because wood is renewable. And it always seems to be that whenever you peel back the onion more than 2 layers, something that appeared to be a clear choice is suddenly a muddled one. And then I have difficulty explaining it to the people that I'm trying to ask to make a change.
Yeah, you just like encapsulated all of the challenges of it right there. I think one thing that I kind of immediately thought of when you said, you've got hourly people, so you're going to have less sets, if you're paying people to take things apart. Sarah Herman and I here in Minneapolis, we're are we calling ourselves part owners at this point, Sarah?
Yep.
In a company called Next Stage, where we're trying to take theatrical waste that would otherwise be going in the dumpster, and we're going to be repurposing it into other things. Because I worked in human resources for 7 years in the theater. So I've definitely seen, those timesheets come back. So I definitely know that that's a real challenge. And as we've been talking at Next Stage, as we're getting the business together, is kind of this idea of the triple bottom line, which I think is a philosophical approach as well. But it's when you're making decisions, I think we're all very ingrained in, looking at the budget, because a budget is a kind of clear, cut and dry kind of thing. But when you're talking about the triple bottom line, you're talking about financial, economic, and social impacts as well. And I think as society, we're very ingrained with just kind of that bottom line, budgetary line item. But when you can start to quantify what is the environmental impact and what is the social impact, and you just, as a philosophical approach, put it on the same level as financial, it inherently will, you can't say, well, this one just is more important than the other. I know that Trevor, who is also part of our Next Stage group, he's finding ways to calculate how much scenery weighs when it is being tossed, as a way to help, kind of the Minneapolis area here understand, if you give us, a set that we can then help salvage and turn into something, it's saving this many tons from going to the dump. And in a lot of ways, it's easy to think of trash as, or putting something in the trash as cheap. But actually, when you think of the long-term impact of something going in the landfill, that impact is so much greater than whatever dollar amount towards the labor is, when you think of how many years it takes to break down, how many toxins is it leaching into the environment. Yeah, that triple bottom line is just kind of one of the first things that I thought of. But Sarah, I don't know if you have any other thoughts kind of off of that.
Yeah, I would also add that if there's a way you can tie your philosophy that you want to spread to the theater's mission, to help sell this to even your development team or your marketers, and they can start spreading the word to their board and whatnot, that these are choices you're making in order to be in line more with your mission. I'm not sure what mission your school has, but usually there's also a marketing tie you can add to either repurposing or downsizing slightly, or I know it's hard to find homes for everything that you make, but even just look into different materials. I know we have a colleague who's working at the U of M in the Twin Cities, who is working a lot with mycelium and growing mushrooms as a different alternative source to styrofoam carving. It's very new. It's it's not like it's a product you can buy right now, but just keeping your ear out for that kind of stuff. I don't know. But I guess tying it back to marketing would be a good thing, so you can tell your patrons we used so many pounds of reclaimed materials on this set, that sort of thing.
One of the things, David, too, that we've been successful with is we do every other year. So now we're doing a thing called Sustainable Shakespeare, where we do, it's all the costumes, the set, and everything are all made from reclaimed materials. And part of the benefit of it, well, like I said about making the aesthetic choice, but the other thing is utilizing green material, like salvaged reclaimed materials, is a big way of inquiry-based learning. So instead of it's this approach to design where, and I have some talks and stuff and articles I can share with you on this, where pedagogically it benefits the students, as opposed to them just Googling what they need. I have to give them a pile of objects and I say, make this, right? That's one big part of it that we've sold really well to the university here. The second part of it too is financially. While it is cheaper, it does take a lot more time. When we put out calls for, like, say, weird collections, does anyone have bulk fabric they want to get rid of, things like that? It creates a lot more community investment, and we see our ticket sales triple when we do shows like this. So I can share with you some stuff later. I can send you my email and send you some materials and stuff that we found successful that you may be able to sway some of your colleagues.
I also think that it's difficult to think of things as like a light switch and then like suddenly everything is green and perfect. I wrote an article that came out this last July, and one thing that I kind of mentioned in that article was the idea of, like, even if you can only make one positive choice, make that positive choice and don't dwell on the other 9 choices that you weren't able to make, because you'll be much more motivated to then go from 1 choice to 2 choices in the next production. I usually call that like an organic development process, because usually positivity spreads positivity. I mean, negativity spreads negativity too. We all know that, but positivity also breeds positivity.
I was just gonna kind of piggyback off of what Luke was saying. So on the last show that I worked on, more because we had a very small budget, we were using a lot of reclaimed materials. And so I'm part of my neighborhood Buy Nothing group on Facebook, which is where I sourced a majority of the stuff that ended up on the set. And the marketing part of that was when I was replying to people's posts, I would say, hey, it's for this play, and I would post a link to the play. And so we actually got a lot of people from the Buy Nothing group come to the show, which bolstered our, ticket sales. But also in the program, we had a part where we talked about how we were using reclaimed materials, and how that was part of our mission with the show, was to lower our impact. So that garnered interest both from the community that wants to be sustainable, because that's part of the mission of the Buy Nothing group. But then also patrons who were there to see the show were like, oh, this is cool. Maybe I should keep my ear out and offer up the extra crap that I have. But again, the trade-off is it did take a lot more time to like gather all that stuff and find stuff that was usable.
Yeah, I think that one thing that I know Sarah and I have also discussed as we're forming Next Stage is this kind of idea of like trying to make it easy for folks that are trying to do the right thing so that they can get scenery to the right place. So I'm not as familiar with, the Pittsburgh area, but I know in Minneapolis, we also have like the Habitat for Humanity Restore, and different things like that. Because I think of like when you're making green choices, there's kind of like 2 approaches. Like one approach is like you are like inherently making the aesthetic choice and using like very different materials, like what I'm going to do with my pop bottle curtain for Little Mermaid. Like I'm using pop bottles. I'm not even using traditional scenery. That is like one approach. But then the other is just being, even if you're using the traditional theater materials, thinking of the life cycle analysis of, where is it coming from? What am I doing to it? And how does what I'm doing to it affect how I can dispose of it? Because I think that there's also those little choices that we make that make it difficult for scenery to be reused when there is potentially another option for it to have another life in some other way, to really think. Because I think kind of in the way that we talked about mission, I think you can almost tie it back to like, what is the story that I'm telling? Because I've even said this to myself when I'm designing a show too, to like remind myself, like, does it really need this like specific texture treatment to better tell the story? Which I think is like a different thing when it's your internal monologue, but I think that's also, part of, you know, just getting people to think differently, to be like, to just kind of like challenge people to think a little differently, to be like, okay, but why is that important to the story that we're telling right now? Because if it's all ultimately about the story that we're telling, like, how is this choice contributing to it? Because we've all seen productions that are like beautiful. Like I did props for a show once where like this actor like legit had like both hands full with props, like a bag and like a hat, and they were like reading something. And like I, as a designer, I was like, I should have pushed harder so that we did not have 5 props on that actor right now, but the director insisted it. So, and I didn't push back on it. But like sitting through that tech week, like that moment where that actor had all of these props and one of them was an apple. And I was just like so mad in that moment where I'm like, I can't believe we're paying for a consumable prop because it is so not needed in what the storytelling is of this moment right now. So I think it's bringing it back to like what is actually needed to help tell the story. Because I think that's the role of the designer, to really push and say like, how am I best supporting the telling of this story?
That's super interesting, Sadie. The show I just worked on, our 2 biggest expenses were props that nobody could really see. And so I think that's a really great way to frame a conversation with other members of production teams, as how are we telling this story? And then also like, what is the story of the materials after the production? Like, how do we combine those 2 things? Because sometimes I get so stuck in just like, it has to be perfect on stage, and then not allowing myself to think about the whole story of the stuff. So I really appreciate that, Sadie.
So I think we've had some like great kind of conversation around like individual choices, but I know one conversation that I've had with a couple of folks, Lucas and I were chatting about this a little bit on a different Zoom call, and I've chatted about this with Adam at the Atlanta Green Theater Alliance a little bit too, but in the way that we can look to other industries that are making green choices really well. I think of architecture and the LEED standard that they have, the kind of tiered system that they have. I kind of want to just take some time to kind of focus on kind of the pros of having kind of like a standard like that to work through, but maybe also some of the cons of having a standard, because I know the conversation is happening right now. So I'm David, I'm kind of particularly curious if you had some kind of like external entity that said, this is a green standard to work towards, if you think that that would be something that could maybe help some of your conversations too.
I mean, I definitely think, you know, if there was something that you put on the program that was like, you know, this is a certified environmentally produced production, that would have a lot of mileage within our entire community. I find that like looking at LEED is difficult because so much of that is about life cycle and about how the building will behave over its entire life, and a lot less about the kind of short-term construction that we do. So, you know, something would have to be purpose-built for theater to be a standard like that. I'm not sure we can adopt an existing standard from somewhere else, but anything that we could model on, I think would have a lot of traction.
Lucas, I know you've started some of that for your own documentation, and I think Chris Carpenter is joining our phone call, which is exciting too. So, but if you want to take a little time to just kind of talk about some of the documentation that maybe you've worked on at Morris.
Yeah, I'm working a lot with our, you know, sustainability is I'm lucky. Sustainability is a big push at Morris, a really big, one of our big moving and shaking aspects. And so I've been working directly with our sustainability officer a lot on a lot of this stuff. So we're working on LEED certification of programs, and he's been kind of pushing that a lot. And so we've just been kind of starting the process. It's a lot of like, the thing is, I keep coming back to with Green Theater is the golden triangle is completely out the window, right? There's no way. Well, we always want to do it good, but like the cheap and fast, like it's just the time frames all over the place. So even just like doing metric data on stuff, it's just we have to take time to do it, and that's the thing that's just it's really frustrating that you have to prove it, right, to show to do it, even though we should just be doing these things. But I mean, I don't know if your university has a sustainability officer or some kind. That's the person I started with. And then just to put a little fire under their butt, I included people in communication and marketing because it's a real hot clickbait item. So I mean, we're still in the we're still in the kind of early phases of the measurement, is something that we're still trying to do. And, a lot of stuff that you mentioned about working with stock and stuff like that, that's the stuff that's kind of the handoff and things like that I'm trying to, sometimes it's hard to make stock scenery sexy. Let's just zero out on that. So that's stuff we're working on, but trying to figure out how to compensate for that is something that I've been aesthetically trying to work on. I don't know. That's all I got, people.
I think stock scenery is like kind of a good staple, but I also think of some of like the smaller theaters that don't have access to that kind of stock scenery as well. So that's where I know we've had a certain amount of conversation with next stage of this idea of a circular economy. So I don't know, David, if there's like other theaters kind of in your area that you could kind of partner with to, even if you can't make one production green in and of itself, is there scenery that you can help circulate into the economy so that other theaters can be using something that would otherwise be just like hanging around, not doing anything? So then they're not making something that then also goes in the trash while this is sitting over here unused. Sarah, I know you've had some thoughts around circular economy, and I know you have great little imagery. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about kind of the idea of circular economy and supporting that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's just about reaching out and building your network. But also it's a development, it takes time, just like anything else. I guess what I try to do as a designer is I try and keep an eye out on like our local Facebook technical theater group and see if anybody's giving away stuff and if it could possibly work in a show that I have lined up in the next 6 months. Because if it does, then I'll take it. And if it's just about staying in touch with the local designer and technician network that you have, and posting stuff and seeing what else can be used, or replying to people's like in search of requests.
Does Pittsburgh have like a Facebook group kind of like that? I know in the Twin Cities here, we've got the Twin Cities Theater on a Budget. And I know Chicago and Atlanta both have some kind of Facebook group like that as well.
Yeah, there's a Pittsburgh Technical Theater Facebook group, and I'm part of it. I can't remember people saying like, we're striking our show, come take our stuff. But actually that would seem like a reasonable post to do for everybody that's doing a show. We do, between a dozen and 20 productions a year at CMU. So we're doing a lot of that internally. Like we're trying to make sure that nothing that has continued use that is recoverable for a reasonable effort is going into the dumpster, and that it is restocked and appears in at least 2 or 3 shows before it goes out the door. And then we've got relationships with a couple of theaters where they'll be like, we're doing our show, can we come get stuff from your cast offs? But the timing of that is always complicated, and there's a storage issue, like, so if our end of our show doesn't really line up well with the beginning of their show, they don't have any place to put things. But there's definitely an idea there. And going back to what you were saying before, we do have architectural salvage here. There's a company called Construction Junction, which stocks stuff when people are renovating their homes, and they take stuff there. And attached to that company, there's another group called the Center for Creative Reuse that actually brings on art supplies and really anything that could be considered art supplies, so like, bottle caps and stuff like that. And area schools and organizations coordinate with them to get supplies from them. So there is a little bit of a reuse economy already in existence in Pittsburgh. But even something as simple as just everybody posting their strike and kind of welcoming anyone that might want to come and pick around before things go in the dumpster would be really low-hanging fruit and easy to do. And it's actually surprising me that I haven't seen that already.
Oh, we do that actually out behind my shop as well. Before we do a wood dumpster, we just do a free-for-all kind of pickup, and I am amazed by the well, I shouldn't say crap, but I should say anything a 2x4 that's smaller than my forearm, people are all over. I mean, we live in a rural community too, so there's a lot of farm tinkerers. That's the other thing. But we definitely, yeah. One of the things you might want to look at too, and I'm boasting about the U of M again. The U of M has a warehouse where they archive all of their equipment that there isn't used anymore. I can't remember what it's called. It's U of M Restore or something. Anyway, I would be surprised if Carnegie Mellon didn't have a warehouse. It's like, that scene Indiana Jones at the end where they have all that. That's like what ours looks like. It's really overwhelming. That's another resource as well, because like that's where I get all sorts of electrical cable, bulk items, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, and I think kind of what you're talking about in terms of like being able to like post, this is our strike free for all before anything goes into the dumpster. Those are like the small cultural shifts that because I imagine when you're saying, how many productions did you say that you do? 12 to 20?
Yeah, it's a dozen shows with scenery.
Yeah, because I imagine that you must have a certain kind of presence in Pittsburgh that I think when people say, well, Carnegie Mellon is starting to do that, so why shouldn't I do that? I think that that's also kind of part of that culture shift, but I think that also gets into like that triple bottom line that I mentioned around what's the social impact. It may not have a big financial impact to let stuff sit on your loading dock for a week before you toss it away, but it might have a bigger social impact. And even if it is like when you first start, just like take a picture of like, this is what was put on the dock on Monday, and we let it sit there for a week, and this is what was taken. Even if you can't quantify, in the weight category, because I think a lot of, waste disposal thinks of things in like tonnage. Even if you can't, calculate the weight, when you can put a picture side by side to say, we were going to throw this much out, but we opened it up for people to take, and then this is how much actually got thrown out. It's a good visual story. And it's a good reminder for yourselves too, that I think because I think of when you're also working with a staff, because there's kind of the ecosystem that we all sit within. There's the larger theater system that we all kind of play within, but also institutionally, what does that culture look like? Because I know with Next Stage, we have put collection boxes in various scene shops. And I think of just having that collection box present to say, before you toss it away, think if you can put it in this donation box so it can go someplace to be reused. The kind of power that has with your staff as well, to get because then if you can get a whole staff to think differently, that's huge. It's not just you thinking differently. It makes me think of like the very first paint call that I ever led in college. When I was like Scenic charge for the first time, I had like 12 people on the call, and it was like the big paint day before the load in. And I remember like running around like crazy, like telling people what to do. And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, I haven't painted at all today. Like, what am I doing here? But then I was like, just because you haven't painted doesn't mean that you haven't kept 12 other people busy, which keeping 12 other people busy has far greater impact than just me painting by myself anxiously all day long. So I think sometimes when you can think of, you know, maybe that balance of like, yes, I can make these choices, but then how can I also inspire other people to make choices too? You know, that's kind of like your indirect influence as well of, you know, how you can have those ripple effects kind of in the community.
Yeah, I would also add that if there's, going back to like a collection box, if there's a way to reach out to other departments at your university, I'm sure like there are studio artists that would grab, you know, all the MDF scraps that you might have, or Luan scraps, or if you're, you know, if you have like chunks of muslin that are too small to use in theater, they might find it useful.
And sometimes I think it's about like thinking about the relationships that are immediately with you, kind of like what Sarah just described. Because sometimes I feel like there can be like this pressure to like reinvent the wheel sometimes that isn't needed. Because sometimes like we've talked about how like it's not like our scenery salvage isn't just for theater people, it's for other art disciplines as well. So, you know, maybe it's like, oh, I've never actually thought like maybe that person would be interested, and just asking the question is the only barrier there to get that relationship started with someone that you might already know. So. Great. Well, I wrote down a couple of just kind of broad questions as well, that I thought might be kind of interesting topics to discuss. But I'm just kind of curious about digging a little bit deeper. I think we've touched on this kind of a little bit kind of throughout this conversation, but this idea of like what holds us back from making these green choices, how much of it is us just telling ourselves that we can't make these choices based on our perception of this is the way we've always done it. So I think we've kind of touched on kind of time crunches, kind of budgetary crunches, maybe expectations from maybe directors or audiences that maybe hold us back in those green choices. But I'm just curious, what other barriers do we think are out there that are maybe stopping us from making greener choices? I know that's kind of a big, broad question.
I would say first comes to mind for me is convenience. Like if I'm already at Menards picking up paint or, you know, hardware or whatever, I might just get my sheets of masonite there, my sheets of Luan there, because I don't have to turn in 2 receipts then, I only have to turn in 1. So convenience sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a convenience is a big theme kind of throughout it, because it's always more convenient to put something in the trash than to think 3 more steps down of like, but what else could I do with it instead of put it in the trash? So. Hey, is it Tanya you just joined us?
Yes, I'm actually not in the Twin Cities. I'm down in Florida right now, but I used to live in the Twin Cities, and I teach a class called Performance in the Environment down here, and am friends with some scenic designers involved in the Broadway Green Captains Alliance, and kind of teach about the Broadway Green Alliance. And so I was just super excited to see that Minneapolis is getting a Green Alliance, and was interested in getting ideas for maybe creating a Tampa Bay Green Alliance. So this is the first I've seen that the Broadway Green Alliance is expanding to regional chapters. And so I was on Facebook and the event was here and I thought, oh, I want to see what's happening. So
Yeah. Yeah, we're the fourth chapter in Minneapolis here. So I told Molly at the Broadway Green Theater Alliance, I was like, I will get other chapters started. Watch me. So if we, David, if you also want to start a Pittsburgh chapter, we can have that conversation too. But Tanya, because we were talking just a little bit kind of about, the various aspects of, how to make, greener choices, but I'm a little curious if you can tell us a little bit more about the class that you teach around, you said environment in the theater, or what was that?
It's called performance in the environment. And, I look at performance media. The focus is theater, but then most ecologically related performances kind of are more experimental. And so they tend to be site specific or dance, multimedia, intermedia. I also teach, include eco cinema and educational presentations as examples of performative media. And I have one unit on eco-scenography. We look at, there's a scenic designer and theorist named Tanya Beer, who she has a whole theory around eco-scenography, and she has a long, like kind of years-long project called the Living Stage. She does a lot of design work with installation with plants. The plants are kind of co-performers in the space. Just some really lovely, interesting work. She's based in Australia, but she's done work all over the place. And then my friend Brad Steinmetz from grad school, he's a scene design professor at Ohio State University, and he won the World Stage Design Competition for sustainable theater, designing a project called the Willow Theater. And that was the year they were in Cardiff, Wales. So he'll, out of kindness, come talk to my class about sustainable theater design, designing buildings, and we'll look at that. And then I look at the Broadway Green Alliance. There's Julie's Bicycle in London that we'll look at. I'm very interested to now be able to just refer to the Minneapolis Green Alliance. And then the students have an assignment where they go and they need to design a prop or a costume or a set piece using only, found materials that they are recycling, repurposing, and then ultimately can recycle, repurpose following the project. And I have a number of different scripts that they're working with. So I'm part of something called the Climate Change Theater Action, which I encourage you all to get involved with. It's happening this year. It is a worldwide performance initiative that correlates with the UN climate talks. So with COP26, there are, it's run by the Arctic Cycle. Chantal Bilodeau is a playwright. And initially it was run by some other people, and they commission 50 plays by playwrights from all over the world. They're 5-minute plays around a climate change related theme. And this year's theme is a Green New Deal. The theme before 2 years, it happens every 2 years. The theme before was Lighting the Way, looking at climate heroes. And the time before that was Where is the Hope? So kind of trying to create optimism among climate activists. And anyone who agrees to can perform as part of the Climate Change Theater Action. You get your performance posted on their webpage, put on their worldwide map. Right now they have performances going on in, I think something like 40 different countries. Last I heard from Chantal, they only had performances happening in 30 different states. And the playwrights have offered the plays, as long as you're performing them as part of climate change theater action, to be performed royalty-free between kind of mid-October all the way up to mid-December in conjunction with climate change, with the COP26. One of the conditions of the performances is first you perform at least one of the scripts. It could be just a living room reading. Last time, a bunch of theater artists in Paris got together in someone's living room, got some wine, and just read the plays together, and they got to be on the climate change theater action map. And then the other component of the project is that you need to do an action, a climate activism action. So a couple of the things that I did last time that I participated in climate change theater action, there was a student group on campus that does political initiatives, and they found some climate activism political initiatives that were coming before different local representatives and different congressional representatives, and they put information about those initiatives and brought in recyclable postcards and paid for stamps, and then the audience members could write to the representatives on the addresses provided, and this group mailed those postcards out as part of it. I also kind of reached out to a native plant organization, and they donated native wildflower seeds, and my students all made seed balls that we kind of handed out to the audience as kind of party favors to take and plant for the pollinators in our region. And we also had some recyclable kind of pots and I got some donations of native plants from the Native Plant Society, and audience members were able to pot their own plant and take it away, either to keep at home or plant in their garden. But there are a lot of, there's something called the Climate Ribbon Project that I've seen a lot of the climate change theater action people are participating in this year. And if you just Google it, you can find their website. And the idea is that you write something that you don't want to lose, that something you love about the world that you don't want to lose to climate change, and you hang it on a tree or some other designated location, and then you can take someone else's thing and wear it kind of as a remembrance, or kind of, and add your wish to theirs.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing all that. I think you you definitely need to start a Tampa Bay chapter. Holy wow, you're so well informed. I'm so impressed. I love that you brought up the climate change theater action, because I think David, kind of going back to kind of some of your initial kind of looking for suggestions, I think looking at like organizations like that also help. If you maybe feel like your theater is kind of like in a spot of maybe not seeing how it fits into a bigger picture, an activity or organization, however you want to categorize it, helps people that maybe aren't thinking about making greener choices, helps them see that it really truly fits in with a bigger international conversation. And because I think like in theater, it's so easy to get like so myopically focused because we just get kind of tunnel vision at times, that I think that's like another just kind of great example of whether it's the Broadway Green Theater Alliance or Climate Theater Action. I think either of those are, good examples of, kind of what Tanya had mentioned of, let's just do a reading of this to participate in it, that being that one step in the right direction to kind of get involved in some ways. Because I think sometimes the first step is the hardest step at times. So, great. Does anyone else have any other thoughts around climate change theater action? Or do we want to spend any more time talking about that?
I guess I would also recommend that even if you don't form an official you know, Broadway Green Alliance chapter, you could follow some of their actions that they take, where they ask for someone to be like the green captain for this production, and think of ways to maybe minimize the use of paper and during rehearsal, or you know, how to set up like a water refill station at that location or whatnot, to just maybe think of ways that you can use some of the tools that they've already put in practice and that are useful. And then that gives people within that production, you know, it spreads the work a little bit, and it gets other people in that production involved too.
Yeah. We were also kind of talking a little bit about kind of the barriers that kind of keep us from making green choices. And we were just kind of talking about the convenience of things. And sometimes I think kind of, Sarah, what you're talking about in terms of, you know, putting a bottle refill station in place, sometimes the convenient things aren't there yet. And sometimes you don't see them until it's like, oh yeah, that is actually way more convenient to like have this other method. I just haven't thought of it yet. I think that's one thing too. But yeah, what else do we think is a potential kind of barrier that prevents us from making green choices in theater?
Storage.
Yep, David, you kind of mentioned that a little bit too, and I've worked in theaters of a couple different sizes, and it's kind of remarkable to me that no matter how big a theater is, there isn't enough space, whether you're this big or whether you're this big. Storage is such a big point of everyone's conversation, whether it's holding on to scenery to use again, or being able to save materials, you know, unconventional materials to use in a different way. So I think, yep, storage is definitely one as well.
I'd also add that I think David's earlier point of like having conversations with designers and directors is sometimes a sticking point. If people have a particular look that they're going for, a particular, you know, vision in their head, and it requires using you know, a bunch of texture that gets put on the wood so that the wood isn't really reusable afterwards, you know, sometimes that can be tricky. It's a conversation about yeah, what you were saying earlier about telling the story, and if this choice is worth it, and if it is, then how do you make the best choice?
Yeah. Well, we've had a pretty, I think, good conversation for, you know, an hour here or so. David, I'm hoping that you maybe took some kind of nuggets that you can kind of take away with, or, you know, kind of take back and maybe kind of start to implement, because I think that kind of helped our structure our conversation a little bit too. So I think kind of for our closing kind of question before we kind of wrap things up, it's another kind of big kind of question, but if you had like a magic wand, which my wand is apparently a pen tonight, and if you had a magic wand and you could just like make something appear that would make your green choices easier, you know, with your magic wand, or, you know, what would be that magical thing that would just make things easier?
Like a real thing or a fantastical thing?
I think you can have one of each.
I mean, I could use a closet of infinite volume in my scene shop to store all the things that I don't want to be throwing away.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like Hermione's like bag, where she just constantly puts stuff in her bag. Like, I want that. But it's like one of those big dumpster bags. I just keep putting stuff in it and pulling stuff out.
In D&D, that's a bag of holding. It's great. So this is the thought, and I think maybe Luke had mentioned something about this, which planted the seed, but I think having MSDS sheets is super helpful, and it's something I always forget about, because one of the things I'm running into and thinking is not so much about the waste, but about the environmental impact. And so knowing what the impact of the materials that I use is, and being able to present that to the other members of the production team. So I think it's a little bit fantastical in that I don't want to do the work of pulling up MSDS sheets for everything that I use. And so it'd be great if that just existed. But it's also something I think I'm going to start looking into for all of my shows. Also, then when I do give the stuff away, I can be like, here's MSDS sheet for all the things that I applied to the surface of this piece of wood, so that the next people know, like, oh, I shouldn't sand this, or, oh, I need to dispose of it this way.
I think that's brilliant. Like, there's so many theaters in the Twin Cities that have their own giant booklet of MDS sheets and or SDS sheets, and then like there's a lot of smaller theaters who don't have that sort of thing. So if there's a way we can make it digital, where it's just like a free resource for everybody to like be able to look up, and people can maybe upload links to new products, then that means we all have to do less research and we can just share our research.
I also like the thoughtfulness that goes into, like, I save the MSDS sheet not only for myself, but for other people. Like, to me, that's like, it's almost like a life cycle analysis of the SDS sheet inherently. So I think that it shows a kind of, because like really it's about caring for people, right? Like that's part of the reason we need to make these greener choices so that the planet stays around, is because we want everyone to be healthy at the end of the day. So other magic wands. What are our magic wands creating here? I can see Tanya's really thinking about it. She's got her thinking eyes on.
Yeah, I was thinking a kind of mind control, or like magical get everybody on board wand.
Yeah, it's kind of like the magic of it is just like, boom, now you know it. But like the practical world of it is like, we will offer the education series, so then you will eventually know it.
Slow moving magic wand there.
My jam is just composting. I love composting, and I think theaters miss out on including those sort of bins at their spaces. They might have recycling and trash, but even just like, I know it's a big thing, and like each city has their own rules and like systems, but even just setting out compost bins would be great. And have, someone once every 2 weeks bring it out to a city compost. Wouldn't that be great?
I know that when the Guthrie did Floyd's, which was about a sandwich shop, there was a lot of food waste created. And I know that for that production specifically, they had set up a composting system, because like literally part of the show was literally just like chopping vegetables, just like endlessly. And I think that it was show specific, but it put into motion other, like, how can we do compost in other ways? So I think it's taking like those moments to implement long-term too. So Luke, I'm wondering, you're in the clouds there, so I assume you're dreaming. Like, what would your magic wand get you if you could just wave your magic wand and get something that made green choices easier?
I forgot my camera was on. I'm sorry. I would love oh shit, I don't know. Probably some more awareness on just materials and ease of getting them. So there's so often when I'm going looking for props and stuff, people are like, oh man, I had this thing and it was perfect and I threw it out last week. And I just think, in the 60s, they used, well, not in the 60s, they still do it, but there was this idea in San Francisco called the free stores, where people, take furniture, take all that shit. And, it's that kind of stuff, it would be so invaluable to us, just, you have to be there when you have to be there, but like, it's being able to like, oh, there's furniture at the free store and I'm done, I can bring it back, and it's the whole, just, I think it's more of a perception shift. Okay, so magic wand. I want people to be more aware of what they're doing.
And your magic wand is a paintbrush tonight. If I'm a pen, you're a paintbrush. So
Yep.
great. Is there anything else, any specific ideas or anything anyone had, or any other kind of comments or thoughts anyone else wanted to share? I don't want to cut anything off if anyone had a pressing question or an idea that they wanted to share.
I was just wondering, I think I came across a company out of Los Angeles called Reset, and I'm wondering if you've stumbled across them, because they sound like they're in the same space that you're talking about operating in Twin Cities.
Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Reset is in Ohio, isn't it? There might be a Los Angeles one.
It's a digital space, so I don't know exactly which state it's out of, but
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look up the name, but this is definitely a group out of California that is salvaging scenery off of film and television shoots and warehousing them, and having raw materials, salvage materials, and also completed pieces of scenery that they then stock, that other people can go and pull for their own productions for a fee. But also, I think that they were actually able to get it to a point where they were able to get the shoots to pay them to take their stuff away, because the companies were having to pay for disposal anyway. And so giving them a green opportunity to pay and have it restocked was economically viable to them. And the most interesting part of that story, I think, is that when they looked at the waste on the film sets, the biggest waste was actually in catering. And so they had a whole division of their company that's all about salvaging the food on film and TV sets and getting it donated to people that need food, which isn't really part of our theater scene, but was really interesting to me that turned out to be a huge area of waste in film and TV.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think I have visited that website, but there's also a digital company that might be out of Ohio that I think is called Reset, and they are basically a nationwide theatrical reuse, like Facebook Marketplace kind of. So it involves a lot of like shipping things around the country, but it's a good resource.
Great. Any other last thoughts or comments before I stop recording?
I have one more thought, and I'm thinking about my last show where I made really sustainable choices up until production week, or tech week, and then it was just like, I need to get this done. And it was more about the brain fatigue of that moment. And so I think what would be an interesting resource is like, because I knew I had brain fatigue, but knowing that there's a group of like-minded individuals who could just like ground me in that moment to be like, what's a more sustainable choice? Or like having a backup group that, you know, when you are in tech week and you don't have the time to think about a lot of stuff, you could just like send a message to be like, hey, does anybody have an idea where I could get this thing in a sustainable way?
That's kind of a cool idea. I like that, because I have friends that like, I've been in tech weeks before where we just like have the joke of like, uh-oh, we've got the 3 o'clock glaze. Like we can't take it back right now. All we can do is just like get through this. So I think what you're talking about is an understood thing. So Well, I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I didn't know that it would be such a national conversation. I thought it was just going to be Minneapolis, Minnesota folks. So
Thanks for welcoming the truly remote folks.
absolutely. We've got more conversations coming up too. I don't know if you've looked at the events, but kind of focused in kind of the different disciplines. So tonight was a little bit scenic focused. Next week, we'll kind of focus on costuming, because I think, it's kind of a whole different world when you're talking about clothing and fabric. So feel free to check those out and join the Zoom whenever you're available. But yeah, so thanks so much, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for letting me crash your party.